The digital clock on the mahogany wall read 2:14 a.m., a red glare in the otherwise cool, blue-tinted room. For Caroline, this was usually the witching hour of productivity, where the noise of the world fell away and only the clean, hard lines of data remained. Emotions were liabilities here. Profit margins were the only truth that didn't fluctuate with sentiment. But tonight, the spreadsheet blurring on her laptop screen couldn't compete with the woman sitting across the expanse of the conference table. The merger was stalling, not because of the numbers, but because Anna, the lead negotiator for the rival firm, was looking at her with a heat that defied every single calculated projection in the room. It was a sensory collision, the cold, backlit logic of Excel versus the warm, unblinking weight of a gaze that seemed to see right through her projections. They called Caroline the Ice Queen of the financial district, a title she wore like the tailored armor of her charcoal suits. She didn't mind the moniker. Ice was solid, predictable. It preserved things, kept them from rotting in the mess of human error, and ensured that in her zero-sum world, she was never the one who lost. The conference room was her domain, a sterile aquarium of glass and steel, suspended 40 stories above the sleeping city, isolated from the chaotic pulse below. Here, the air was recycled, the coffee was bitter, and the stakes were always absolute. But Anna was a variable Caroline hadn't built a contingency for. She wasn't an enemy, exactly. Enemies were easy to categorize, easy to dismantle with a well-placed clause or a leverage buyout. Anna was chaos. She sat with a relaxed posture that offended the rigid ergonomics of the Herman Miller chair, tapping a fountain pen against her lips in a rhythm that seemed to mock the ticking clock. Unlike Caroline, who was buttoned up to her throat in high-collared prudence, Anna wore her confidence loosely, draped in fabrics that moved when she did. She refused to stick to the agenda, asking questions about corporate culture and employee retention rates instead of focusing on the EBITDA multiples. She brought a warmth into the room that felt invasive, a humidity that threatened to warp the crisp edges of Caroline's reality. "We need to finalize the asset allocation before the markets open in Tokyo," Caroline said, her voice clipped, professional. She kept her eyes on the screen, refusing to engage with the casual way Anna had unbuttoned the cuffs of her silk blouse. "We have time," Anna countered, her voice a low, steady hum that seemed to vibrate through the table. "The numbers aren't going anywhere, Caroline. But we haven't even discussed the integration strategy for the creative teams." Caroline tightened her grip on the mouse. "Integration is a post-merger problem. Right now, we are discussing acquisition." "Is that all this is? An acquisition?" Anna asked, and the double meaning hung in the air, heavy and unignorable. Around them, the support teams had been slowly disintegrating for hours. The junior analysts had long since lost the light in their eyes, slumped over tablets and empty energy drink cans. The legal counsel was rubbing his temples with a desperation that signaled a migraine. Finally, with a silent consensus born of sheer exhaustion, the room began to clear. One by one, the associates murmured apologies and retreated, leaving the battlefield to the generals. The heavy glass door clicked shut for the last time, finally sealing the silence. Now it was just the hum of the server banks and the two of them. The sudden emptiness of the room amplified everything. The scratch of Anna's pen on paper sounded like a tectonic shift. The way the city lights blurred against the glass felt dizzying, turning the room into a capsule drifting in the deep dark. The scent of her perfume, something earthy like sandalwood and rain, drifted across the table, bypassing Caroline's logical defenses to hit something primal in her limbic system. Caroline straightened her spine, reinforcing her walls. She needed to maintain the rigid professional distance that had kept her safe for a decade. She needed to speak in the language of liquidity events and risk mitigation, to use corporate jargon as a shield against the observant, dark eyes that were currently dismantling her composure piece by piece. "The valuation on the intellectual property is still a point of contention," Caroline stated, forcing her gaze to meet Anna's. She expected a counterargument, a percentage point dispute. Instead, Anna just smiled, a small, knowing expression that made Caroline feel like she was the asset being negotiated. "We can talk about the IP," Anna said softly, "but I think we both know that's not really what's stalling us." Caroline felt a flush rise beneath her collar, a physiological betrayal she couldn't suppress. This was the danger of variables you couldn't quantify. They forced you to improvise. They demanded a kind of flexibility Caroline had spent years training out of her system, replacing instinct with cold, hard data. And looking at Anna, alone in the high-altitude quiet of 2 a.m., Caroline realized with a jolt of terrifying clarity that for the first time in her career, she didn't know the winning move. She only knew that the game had changed, and the ice was beginning to crack. "Page 42, paragraph 3, Anna said. She wasn't looking at the document. Her gaze was fixed on Caroline's hands, which had stilled over the keyboard. Caroline froze. That was the indemnity clause, the structural weak point in the deal she had spent weeks fortifying with layers of legal jargon. Caroline prepared her standard defense, a barrage of statistics about liability caps and insurance thresholds. But Anna didn't ask about the cap. "You don't believe in this timeline, do you?" she asked quietly. It wasn't an accusation, it was an observation, delivered with the casual certainty of someone noting the weather. Caroline blinked, her mouth opening to cite the efficiency projections before snapping shut. There was no mathematical defense for a feeling, no spreadsheet to counter an intuition that had bypassed her firewall. This was the problem with Anna. She wasn't debating the contract, she was debating Caroline. She was reading the micro-tensions in Caroline's jaw, the slight hesitation before she turned a page, the way her breath hitched when the silence stretched too long. It felt invasive, like someone walking into her mind with muddy boots and rearranging the furniture. Anna was bypassing the facts to target the instinct, dismantling Caroline's strategy faster than any forensic audit could. It felt like a glitch in the algorithm. Every time Caroline tried to pivot back to the safety of the agenda, Anna was there, waiting. A step ahead, not because she had done more research, but because she was paying attention to the human element Caroline worked so hard to erase. "The timeline is aggressive," Caroline admitted finally, the words tasting like ash, "but necessary for the quarterly targets." Anna just hummed, a low sound that vibrated in the quiet room. "Targets are just projections, Caroline. Burnout is a reality you can't hedge against." Just then, the building's automated systems decided the workday was officially over. The harsh, fluorescent overheads flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging the room into a sudden, velvety semi-darkness. Emergency accent lights hummed to life along the baseboards, casting long, dramatic shadows up the glass walls. The sudden shift in atmosphere was jarring. The clinical interrogation room had vanished, replaced by something intimate, shadowed, and dangerous. The city lights outside, previously just a backdrop, now flooded the space, painting Anna in strokes of amber and neon blue, softening the sharp edges of the corporate battlefield. "Better," Anna said, her voice dropping an octave to match the dimness. She stood up. The sound of her chair sliding back on the plush carpet was deafening in the new silence. Caroline watched, paralyzed, as Anna gathered her stack of files. She didn't walk to the door. She didn't pace. She walked around the long expanse of the mahogany table, the click of her heels measuring the shrinking distance between them. She bypassed the empty chairs of the legal team, the abandoned notepads of the analysts, and pulled out the chair directly adjacent to Caroline's. The review chair, usually reserved for a subordinate or a partner, not a rival. She sat down. The air pressure in the room seemed to drop, the oxygen suddenly thinner. Anna was close now, too close. Caroline could smell the specific notes of her perfume, the sandalwood deepening into something warmer, like skin and night air. She could see the fine grain of the paper Anna smoothed out on the table, the way her manicured nails tapped a silent rhythm against the edge of the leather portfolio. The physical distance that had served as a demilitarized zone was gone. Caroline's heart rate spiked, a traitorous physiological response she couldn't authorize. She stared at the screen, but the numbers were just shapes now. The only data was the heat radiating from the woman sitting 6 inches away, a variable that was rapidly becoming the only thing Caroline could focus on. The silence on the 41st floor possessed a physical weight, a pressurized stillness that made the outside world feel theoretical. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass, the city was just a sprawling circuit board of amber and white, a distant grid that no longer held any authority over them. Up here, suspended in the cool, recycled air of the skyscraper, time had dissolved into a strange, fluid loop. There were no sirens, no traffic, no chaotic pulse of humanity. Only the low, steady hum of the climate control and the rhythmic scratch of Anna's pen against the heavy bond paper. They had settled into a rhythm that Caroline hadn't anticipated. The adversarial, sharp edges of the last 6 hours had softened, worn down by exhaustion and necessity. They were no longer fencing with clauses. They were building a structure together, brick by verbal brick. Subsection 4A is redundant if we keep the liability cap in 4B, Anna murmured, her voice rougher now, stripped of its polished boardroom cadence. She didn't look up, her focus absolute on the document between them. Agreed, Caroline replied, her own voice sounding foreign to her ears, softer, less guarded. Strike it. It was efficient, yes, but it was also intimate. The collaboration felt like a private language, a series of codes and shorthands that only the two of them understood. And in the quiet, Caroline found her defenses eroding, not against the work, but against the woman performing it. Anna's presence had become a sensory field that Caroline couldn't navigate around. It wasn't just the proximity, though the few inches of mahogany between their elbows felt charged, like the air before a lightning strike. It was the details. The scent of her was maddeningly complex. Sandalwood, yes, but underneath that, the sharp, clean smell of expensive ink and the warmth of skin that had been awake too long. It was a grounded, human smell that made the sterile conference room feel suddenly, violently alive. Caroline tried to focus on the EBITDA projections in the margin, but her eyes refused to obey. They drifted, magnetized, to Anna's hands. They were capable hands, devoid of the flashy jewelry most negotiators wore as distraction tactics. Anna wore a single silver ring on her thumb, and the metal caught the dim light every time she moved. Caroline watched the way Anna's fingers gripped the fountain pen, the deliberate, fluid motion of her wrist as she crossed out a line of text. It was hypnotic. There was an elegance to it, a confident dexterity that made Caroline wonder, with a sudden, breathless jolt, what those hands would feel like doing something other than redlining a contract. Caroline? The name snapped her back. She blinked, realizing she had been staring at Anna's knuckles for a full 10 seconds. She looked up to find Anna watching her. Not with the predatory gaze of a rival, but with a heavy-lidded curiosity. You're drifting, Anna said softly. I'm tired, Caroline lied, though the exhaustion was real enough. She rubbed her temples, feeling the tension headache that had been lurking there for hours finally bloom. I usually thrive on this. The quiet, the data. It's cleaner than the day shift. It's lonely, Anna corrected. She capped her pen with a decisive click, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the quiet room. She leaned back, turning her chair slightly so she was facing Caroline fully. You don't thrive on it, Caroline. You endure it. I can see the difference. Caroline opened her mouth to recite her standard speech about dedication and high-performance metrics, but the words died in her throat. The way Anna was looking at her, unflinching, seeing right past the corporate armor to the fatigue in her bones, made the lie impossible. I hate the silence, Caroline admitted, the truth slipping out before she could catch it. Her voice was barely a whisper. It makes everything feel finite. The confession hung between them, raw and uncalculated. Anna didn't smile. She didn't use it as leverage. She just nodded, a slow, acknowledging dip of her chin. We need a reset, Anna said, standing up. The movement shifted the air currents, bringing that sandalwood scent over Caroline in a fresh wave. And we need caffeine. Real caffeine, not whatever is left in that carafe. Caroline looked up at her, feeling the dangerous, magnetic pull of the invitation. The break room? The break room, Anna confirmed, extending a hand. Not to shake, but to gesture toward the door. Come on, the merger can survive 10 minutes without us. The break room was a stark contrast to the mahogany and glass theater of the conference room. It was smaller, intimate in a utilitarian way, smelling faintly of burnt popcorn and industrial cleaner. But as the door clicked shut behind them, sealing out the hum of the server banks, the space felt strangely removed from the corporate lattice they inhabited. Here, under the softer under-cabinet lighting, the hierarchy dissolved. There were no tables to sit across, no dossiers to hide behind. Just the white laminate counters and the sudden, jarring domesticity of two women alone at 3 a.m. Caroline moved to the coffee machine, her hand reaching for the canister out of sheer muscle memory. But Anna intercepted her. It wasn't a push. It was a fluid interjection of space and intent. Sit, Anna said. It was a command, but soft, stripped of the sharp edges she'd used during the negotiation. You've been steering the ship for 8 hours. Let me make the coffee. Caroline hesitated. Her instinct was to refuse, to maintain the control she clung to like a lifeline. But the fatigue in her legs was a physical weight, and the way Anna was already grinding the beans, confident, precise, was disarming. Caroline leaned back against the counter opposite the machine, crossing her arms not as a shield this time, but to hold herself together. She watched Anna work. There was a competence in her movements that was mesmerizing. Anna didn't rush. She tamped the grounds with a deliberate pressure, locked the portafilter into place with a solid thunk, and hit the brew button. The machine hissed, a loud, steam-filled sound that filled the small room. They stood in the narrow galley kitchen, the air growing warm and humid between them. It was a proximity that felt dangerous. In the conference room, distance was a weapon. Here, distance was impossible. Caroline could see the slight furrow in Anna's brow as she watched the dark liquid stream into the ceramic mugs. She could see the way a stray lock of hair had escaped Anna's bun to curl against the nape of her neck. A vulnerable human detail that made Caroline's breath catch. Why do you do it? Caroline asked quietly, the question slipping out before she could vet it. Anna didn't look up from the steam rising from the cups. Do what? Make mediocre espresso at an ungodly hour? This, Caroline gestured vaguely to the building around them, to the invisible weight of the merger. The fight. You don't seem like someone who enjoys the blood sport of it. Anna turned then, handing Caroline a mug. Their fingers brushed, just a graze of skin against skin, but the contact sent a shockwave through Caroline's nervous system that had nothing to do with the caffeine. I like the puzzle, Anna said, leaning back against the counter so they were facing each other, barely 2 feet of linoleum between them. She blew softly on her coffee, the steam curling around her face. I like finding the human element in the machine and seeing if I can make it fit. People think this is all math. It's not. It's psychology. It's desire. Caroline watched Anna take a sip. She watched the way her lips wrapped around the rim of the mug, the slight tilt of her head, the column of her throat moving as she swallowed. It was an agonizingly slow image. The heat in the room seemed to spike. Caroline felt exposed, as if Anna's earlier comment about reading her was happening again, right now, in real time. Desire is a liability, Caroline murmured, lifting her own cup to hide the tremor in her hand. It clouds the data, does it? Anna lowered her mug, her dark eyes locking onto Caroline's with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. Or does it just give you a variable you can't control? That's what you hate, isn't it? Not the risk. You love risk. You hate the unpredictable. I hate losing, Caroline corrected, her voice dropping to a husk. Is that what you think is happening here? Anna took a step closer. The scent of sandalwood was overwhelming now, drowning out the coffee. You think you're losing? I think I'm in uncharted territory. That's where the highest yield is, Anna said, her voice dropping to a murmur that vibrated in Caroline's chest. High risk, high reward. Isn't that the first rule of acquisition? The double meaning hung heavy in the humid air. They weren't talking about the merger anymore. They were discussing the terrifying electric current arcing between them, the inevitable collision of two bodies in a space too small to contain the energy they were generating. Caroline looked at Anna, really looked at her, and saw the challenge there. It wasn't a challenge to fight. It was a challenge to yield, to admit that the data was insufficient.
"We should get back," Caroline said, though her feet didn't move.
"The agreement won't sign itself." "No," Anna agreed, her gaze dropping to Caroline's mouth for a fraction of a second before returning to her eyes. "It won't." She held Caroline's gaze for a heartbeat longer, a silent, sultry acknowledgement of the line they were towing, before turning to rinse her spoon in the sink. The spell didn't break, it just stretched. As they walked back down the hallway toward the conference room, the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was companionable. It was charged. They walked side by side, close enough that their arms brushed with the rhythm of their stride, and Caroline realized with a start that she no longer felt like she was walking next to a rival. She was walking next to a partner. And the boardroom ahead felt less like a battlefield and more like the only place left in the world where they could be alone. The dynamic had shifted. The ice had melted, leaving something fluid and hot in its wake. Caroline took a sip of the coffee Anna had made her. It was perfect, and that, more than anything, terrified her. Back in the glass-walled aquarium, the atmosphere had changed. The room felt smaller, the shadows longer. The spreadsheet on the screen was still waiting, the cursor blinking with patient indifference, but the text had lost its authority. They sat down, not in their original positions at opposite ends of the vast table, but side by side again, ostensibly to review the final addendum. "We need to initial the changes to the indemnity clause," Caroline said, sliding the heavy document toward the center. Her voice was steady, but her pulse was a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Do you have a pen?" Anna asked. "I left mine in the break room." "Here." Caroline reached for her fountain pen, a sleek black lacquer instrument she had used to sign deals worth billions. She held it out. Anna reached for it. It should have been a simple transfer of an object, a transaction. But as Anna's fingers closed around the barrel of the pen, they brushed against Caroline's. It wasn't a quick graze this time. It was a collision. Anna's skin was warm, softer than Caroline expected, and for a second, neither of them let go. They were tethered by the pen, connected by a circuit of touch that seemed to ground all the electricity in the room. The sensation was immediate and shocking, like a static discharge in dry air. Caroline felt it travel up her arm, a precise line of heat that bypassed her logic centers and went straight to the base of her spine. She stared at their hands, Anna's long fingers overlapping hers, the silver thumb ring pressing cool against Caroline's skin. The text on the page in front of them blurred into meaningless gray lines. The only data that registered was tactile, the warmth of Anna's palm, the slight roughness of paper under her wrist, the absolute stillness of the moment. Anna didn't pull away. She held the contact, her thumb brushing seemingly inadvertently against the back of Caroline's hand. It was a caress masked as a grip. Caroline's breath hitched, a small, sharp sound in the quiet room. "You have beautiful hands," Anna said softly. She wasn't looking at the contract. She was looking at where their skin met. The compliment was professional on the surface, an observation of fact, but the tone was intimate, low and appreciative. It stripped the moment of its corporate veneer. Caroline felt her face heat. She pulled her hand back, perhaps a fraction too quickly, leaving the pen in Anna's grasp. The loss of contact was a physical coldness. "They're just hands," Caroline stammered, hating the way her voice wavered. She tried to focus on the clause in front of them, but the letters were swimming. Indemnity, liability, force majeure, none of it made sense. The only reality was the woman sitting next to her, twirling Caroline's pen in her fingers with a casual, possessive ease. "They're capable," Anna corrected, uncapping the pen. She signed the document with a flourish, the scratch of the nib loud in the silence. "And steady, usually." She glanced up,
a small teasing smile playing on her lips. "You're shaking, Caroline."
"I'm cold,"
Caroline lied, clutching her elbows.
"Are you?" Anna asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. She slid the document back. Or is the data finally catching up to the desire? Before Caroline could answer, the building gave a low, mechanical groan. The air vents above them hissed into silence as the climate control system powered down for the night, signaling the true dead of night. The hum of the fans died, leaving the room in a profound, heavy silence. The temperature began to drop immediately, the recycled warmth of the day bleeding out into the cold glass shell of the skyscraper. It was just them now, alone in the cooling dark. The drop in temperature wasn't gradual. It was a cliff edge. With the building's life support systems powered down, the glass walls transformed from windows into sheets of ice, conducting the freezing night air of the city directly into the room. Caroline felt the chill seep through the fine wool of her suit, a pervasive, creeping cold that settled in her marrow. She clamped her jaw shut, refusing to shiver, refusing to acknowledge the physiological weakness. In her world, temperature control was just another variable to be managed, but her body was betraying her. A tremor started in her shoulders, small but undeniable, vibrating down her spine like a fault line snapping. Anna was watching her. She didn't say a word. She simply stood up, the movement fluid and decisive in the dim light. She bypassed the table, walking around to Caroline's side of the divide. Caroline stiffened, expecting a new negotiation tactic, a new demand. Instead, Anna shrugged off her blazer. The silk lining rustled softly, a whisper of sound in the dead quiet. Before Caroline could protest, before she could cite the employee handbook or the impropriety of the gesture, the weight of the jacket settled over her shoulders. It was heavy, warm, and smelled violently of Anna. The scent of sandalwood and skin was no longer adrift across the table. It was an atmosphere, enveloping Caroline completely. The heat from Anna's body was still trapped in the fabric, transferring to Caroline in a rush of thermal equilibrium that made her breath hitch. It felt like being held. It felt like a boundary violation that she never wanted to end. "I can't," Caroline murmured, her hands coming up to push the lapels away. "This isn't necessary. The backup generators will kick in the heating loop in—" "Stop," Anna said. She didn't move away. She stood right behind Caroline's chair, her hands resting briefly, heavily, on the shoulders of the jacket she had just surrendered. "You're freezing, Caroline. And the generators are for the servers, not the people. You know that. It's unprofessional," Caroline insisted, though her grip on the jacket was tightening, pulling it closer rather than pushing it away. "Hypothermia is unprofessional," Anna countered, her voice low, right by Caroline's ear. "Freezing before we sign the exit clause would be a logistical nightmare. Consider it a temporary asset transfer." Anna walked back to her seat, now in just her silk blouse. The fabric clung to her, revealing the relaxation of her posture. She didn't look cold. She looked like she generated her own weather. Caroline sat huddled in the blazer, feeling the warmth seep into her frozen muscles. It was disarming. It made her feel small, protected, and terrifyingly seen. "You treat yourself like a machine," Anna observed, picking up her pen again but not writing. She spun it between her fingers. "You think if you ignore the input, the cold, the fatigue, the desire, it ceases to exist. But data doesn't disappear just because you delete the column, Caroline. It just corrupts the file." Caroline looked at her across the table. The darkness of the room made Anna's eyes look black, bottomless. "Emotions are variants," Caroline said, reciting the mantra that had gotten her to the corner office. "They introduce error. They introduce value," Anna corrected gently. "Mergers aren't just about balance sheets. They're about integration. Two distinct entities becoming something new. You can't do that without friction. You can't do that without heat." "And you think we're integrating?" Caroline asked, the subtext clear. "I think we're trying to figure out if we fit," Anna said.
And I think you're realizing that you don't have to be cold to be strong.
The conversation lapsed into silence, but the tension had shifted. It wasn't adversarial anymore. It was the heavy, charged quiet of a question waiting to be answered. They worked for another hour in that strange, intimate capsule. Caroline signed the final page of the acquisition agreement with a hand that was steady, warmed by the jacket that she hadn't taken off. She capped her pen. The sound was final.
It's done, Caroline said, looking at the stack of paper. The deal was closed. The logic was sound.
It's done, Anna echoed. She looked at the papers, then at Caroline, a flicker of something like regret passing over her face. The work was the excuse. The work was the container that held them in this room. And now, the container was open. We should go, Anna said, standing up. Security does a sweep at 4 p.m. Caroline stood too, the jacket slipping slightly on her shoulders. She caught it, pulling it back up. She didn't want to give it back. She didn't want to leave the room. Because leaving meant the data was finalized, and the desire became irrelevant. Or, so she told herself. The sound of the briefcase latches snapping shut echoed in the empty room like a gavel strike. It was a definitive, metal-on-leather finality that signaled the end of the negotiation, the end of the night, and, Caroline feared, the end of whatever strange, suspended reality they had inhabited for the last 6 hours. She stood up, the weight of Anna's blazer still draped over her shoulders. It felt heavier now, or perhaps it was just that the gravity of the situation was finally settling in. She reached for her bag, her fingers brushing the smooth leather, and hesitated. She should give the jacket back. Protocol dictated it. The deal was signed. The asset transfer Anna had joked about was no longer necessary. But the air in the room was still biting, the glass walls radiating a deep, pervasive chill, and the warmth of the silk lining against her neck was the only thing anchoring her to the present. Ready? Anna asked. She was standing by the door, holding it open. Her posture was relaxed, leaning slightly against the frame, but her eyes were alert, tracking Caroline's movements with that same unsettling precision she'd used on the contract. Yes, Caroline said, her voice tight. She didn't offer the jacket back. She walked toward the door, passing through the threshold and into the corridor. The hallway leading to the elevator bank was a long tunnel of hushed gray carpet and recessed lighting. At 2 a.m., it felt like the spine of a dormant beast. They walked in silence, the rhythm of their heels on the floor muffled, creating a soft, syncopated beat. Caroline was acutely aware of the space between them. It wasn't the adversarial distance of the boardroom anymore. It was a magnetic proximity. Anna walked close enough that Caroline could feel the displacement of air with every step. Close enough that the scent of sandalwood trailed her like a ghost. They reached the elevator bank. Caroline pressed the call button. The arrow lit up, a sharp amber triangle pointing down. Down. Back to the lobby, back to the street. Back to the separate lives they had left suspended at the door. The doors were polished brass, mirrored surfaces that distorted their reflections into elongated, golden shapes. Caroline stared at the metal. She saw herself, a rigid, dark figure wrapped in an oversized blazer that clearly didn't belong to her. And she saw Anna, standing just behind her shoulder, not looking at the numbers, but looking at Caroline's reflection. The visual impact of seeing them together, framed in the gold, was jarring. They looked like a set. They looked like a secret. You're overthinking, Anna murmured. She hadn't moved, but her voice seemed closer, reflecting off the metal. I'm calculating, Caroline corrected, though she wasn't sure what the variables were anymore. The math is done, Caroline. Stop trying to solve for X. The elevator arrived with a soft chime that sounded too loud in the quiet corridor. The doors slid open, revealing the small, wood-paneled cab. They stepped inside. The space was confined, intimate. A box designed to force strangers into awkward proximity. But they weren't strangers. Not anymore. As the doors closed, sealing them in, the silence changed. It wasn't the expansive, cold silence of the conference room. It was dense, coiled. The air in the elevator felt thin, recycled, and thick with the voltage of everything they hadn't said. Caroline moved to the back corner, leaning against the rail, needing the support. Anna stood in the center, turning to face the doors, but her eyes were fixed on the mirrored wall that lined the back of the cab. The descent began. It was smooth, a seamless drop that Caroline felt in the pit of her stomach. The floor numbers on the digital display started to count down. 40, 39, 38. Each number was a second slipping away. Caroline watched Anna in the mirror. She watched the way Anna's throat moved as she swallowed, the way her hands hung loose at her sides, deceptively relaxed. But there was tension there, a hum of energy that matched the vibration of the cables holding them. Anna's gaze lifted in the glass, locking onto Caroline's eyes. She didn't look away. Caroline, who had spent her career staring down CEOs and aggressive litigators, found she couldn't break the contact. The scrutiny was intense, stripping away the last layers of her corporate persona. In the mirror, Anna wasn't looking at the Ice Queen. She was looking at the woman wearing her jacket, the woman who had admitted she hated the silence. "It's a long way down," Anna said softly. She wasn't talking about the floors. "It's controlled descent," Caroline replied, the old defensive reflex kicking in, though her voice lacked any real conviction. "Standard velocity." "Nothing about tonight has been standard," Anna countered. She turned around slowly, abandoning the reflection to face Caroline directly. The space between them in the small cab shrank to nothing. "You can feel it, can't you? The pressure." Caroline could feel it. It was pressing against her ribs, making it hard to take a full breath. It was the heat radiating from Anna's body, the smell of her perfume intensifying in the small space. The way the elevator seemed to be a vacuum sealing them together. "It's just gravity," Caroline whispered, a lie that sounded fragile even to her own ears. "Is it?" Anna took a half step closer. She didn't touch Caroline, but she invaded her personal space with a deliberate, terrifying confidence. "Because it feels like we're the only things in this building with a pulse." 20, 19, 18. The numbers blurred. Caroline felt a bead of sweat trace the line of her spine. She was terrified. Not of the deal falling through, not of the merger failing, but of this raw, unquantifiable pull that made her want to reach out and grab the lapels of Anna's blouse just to see if she was real. "We have to be professional," Caroline said, the words sounding like a plea. "We are," Anna replied, her voice dropping to that low, sultry register that made Caroline's knees weak. "We finished the job. The contract is signed. This," she gestured vaguely to the space between them, to the charged, heavy air. "This is off the clock." She looked at Caroline's mouth. It was a fleeting glance, barely a second, but it felt like a touch. Caroline's lips parted slightly, an involuntary invitation she couldn't suppress. The elevator slowed. The deceleration was heavy, pulling at them. 3, 2, 1. The spell didn't break. It shattered. The chime sounded again, cheerful and oblivious. The doors slid open, revealing the cavernous, marble-floored lobby, brightly lit and completely empty. The rush of cool air from the atrium hit them, diluting the thick, heated atmosphere of the elevator. Anna held her gaze for 1 second longer. A promise, or perhaps a challenge, before stepping back, creating the necessary social distance. "After you," Anna said, her voice smooth, the mask sliding back into place. Caroline pushed off the rail, her legs feeling unsteady. She walked out into the lobby, the click of her heels on the marble sounding sharp and lonely. The elevator doors closed behind them, sealing away the tension, but the feeling of the descent, the falling, remained. The lobby of the Sterling Tower was a mausoleum of polished stone and silence, the kind of space designed to make human beings feel small and temporary. As they crossed the expanse of the atrium, the only sound was the sharp, rhythmic click of their heels on the marble, a metronome counting down the final seconds of the night. At the security desk, the night guard, a man named Ralph who had seen Caroline leave at this hour 1,000 times, offered a tired, respectful nod. Usually, Caroline would nod back, a quick, efficient acknowledgement of their shared insomnia. Tonight, she barely saw him. Her entire peripheral vision was consumed by the woman walking a half-step ahead of her, the woman whose blazer was currently the only thing keeping Caroline's shivering at bay. The automatic glass doors slid open with a soft pneumatic hiss, breaking the seal of the building. The transition was violent. The controlled, sterile climate of the skyscraper vanished, replaced instantly by the raw, abrasive reality of the city at 4 a.m. The air that hit them was damp and biting, smelling of wet asphalt, exhaust, and the ozone tang of an approaching storm. It was a cold that didn't just touch the skin, it cut straight through to the bone, a physical reminder that the suspended animation of the conference room was over. They stopped on the curb. The street was largely empty, a canyon of gray concrete and yellow streetlights reflecting in the puddles. A distant siren wailed, a lonely, rising note that faded into the hum of the city. "Well," Anna said, turning to face her. The wind caught stray strands of her hair, blowing them across her face. She didn't brush them away. She looked exhausted, the adrenaline of the negotiation finally bleeding out, leaving behind the pale, bruised look of fatigue. But she also looked resigned. "I suppose this is it. The deal is signed. The assets are transferred. Your board should be happy." Caroline stood frozen, her hands clutching the lapels of Anna's jacket. The words hit her with the force of a physical blow. This is it. The finality of it was terrifying. For 6 hours, they had been locked in a high-stakes orbit, bound together by the gravity of the merger. Every argument, every glance, every brush of skin had been justified by the work. The work was the container. The work was the excuse. But the work was done. In Caroline's world, when a transaction was concluded, you closed the file. You archived the data. You moved on to the next acquisition. There was no column in the spreadsheet for lingering. There was no line item for missing the way your rival holds a pen. The logic of her life dictated that she should shake Anna's hand, thank her for the jacket, and get into her waiting town car. It was the safe move. It was the calculated move. But as she looked at Anna standing under the harsh glare of the street lamp, Caroline realized that the calculation was wrong. The data was irrelevant. The profit from the merger, the billions in equity, the market dominance, the board's approval, felt suddenly, hollowly worthless compared to the terrifying prospect of watching Anna get into a cab and drive away. It was a panic Caroline hadn't forecasted. It rose in her chest, tight and hot, overriding the cool, disciplined algorithms of her brain. She realized, with a jolt of clarity that made her knees weak, that she didn't want the profit. She wanted the friction. She wanted the challenge. She wanted the woman who had looked at her across a boardroom table and seen not a title, but a person worth thawing. "You'll need this back," Caroline said, her voice sounding brittle in the cold air. She made a motion to shrug off the blazer, a half-hearted gesture that she prayed Anna would stop. "Keep it," Anna said softly, shoving her hands into the pockets of her trousers. She shivered slightly, the silk blouse offering no protection against the wind, but she didn't ask for the coat. "Consider it a closing bonus. You can courier it to my office next week." Next week. The words sounded like a lifetime away. A courier, a sterile exchange of goods handled by assistants. No contact, no late nights, no friction. A yellow taxi turned the corner, its for-hire light glowing like a beacon in the gray pre-dawn. Anna raised a hand, the movement weary but decisive. The cab slowed, tires hissing on the damp pavement, pulling up to the curb with a squeal of brakes. This was the breakpoint. The variable was leaving the equation. Caroline's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, irregular rhythm that defied all her training. Risk assessment, her mind screamed. High probability of rejection. Catastrophic emotional exposure. Deviation from protocol. But then she looked at Anna's back as she reached for the door handle. She saw the hesitation, the split-second pause before Anna pulled the door open. It was a glitch, a signal.
Caroline didn't think. She didn't calculate. For the first time in her life, she didn't check the data. She just acted.
Anna, Caroline said. It wasn't the sharp, projected voice of the boardroom. It was a raw, desperate sound that was torn out of her. Anna froze. She didn't open the door. She stood there for a heartbeat, her hand on the handle, the taxi idling loudly beside her. Then, slowly, she turned back. Her expression was unreadable in the shadows, but her eyes were wide, waiting.
"Don't go," Caroline said, the words rushing out before she could censor them.
"Not yet."
The taxi driver, a man with heavy eyelids and zero patience for corporate indecision, leaned across the passenger seat. "Lady, are you getting in or what? Meter's not running, but my time is."
Anna didn't look at him. She was looking at Caroline, her hand still hovering over the door handle. Her body turned halfway back toward the curb. The wind whipped a strand of dark hair across her mouth, but she didn't move to brush it away. She was frozen, caught in the gravity of Caroline's desperation. The silence that stretched between them was louder than the idling engine, louder than the distant hum of the city waking up. It was a suspended chord, vibrating with the terrified energy of a risk finally taken.
"I'm not getting in,"
Anna said, her voice low but carrying clearly over the damp pavement. She slammed the car door shut. The sound was a gunshot of finality. The taxi didn't wait for an explanation. It peeled away from the curb with a sharp screech of tires, taillights blurring into red streaks as it disappeared down the avenue, taking the easy exit with it. They were alone on the street now. The security lights of the Sterling Tower cast long, distorted shadows against the concrete, framing them in a pool of artificial daylight. Caroline felt the cold bite through the silk of her blouse where the jacket had slipped, but the shivering had stopped. Her heart was hammering a frantic, irregular rhythm against her ribs. Not the steady cadence of a negotiator, but the wild, erratic beat of someone standing on a ledge.
"You're not going," Caroline repeated, the words feeling foreign and heavy on her tongue.
She stepped closer, closing the physical distance Anna had tried to put between them. "Because the deal isn't finished." Anna turned fully to face her. She looked exhausted, the adrenaline of the night fading to reveal a raw, unguarded weariness. But her eyes were sharp, searching Caroline's face for the data behind the declaration. "The deal is signed, Caroline. The assets are allocated. The lawyers are happy. What exactly is left to negotiate?"
"The terms of the partnership," Caroline said.
Her voice lost its polished boardroom edge, cracking slightly on the last syllable. She wasn't speaking to a rival firm anymore. She was speaking to the only person who had ever made her want to burn the rulebook. "I don't want a transaction. I don't want to file this away as a quarterly win and go back to the silence." Anna took a step back from the curb, moving into the circle of Caroline's space. The scent of sandalwood and rain hit Caroline again, a sensory anchor in the spinning world. "You hate variables," Anna said softly, a challenge wrapped in a whisper. "You hate things you can't predict. And I am the biggest variable you've ever encountered." "I know," Caroline admitted. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly as she took hold of the lapel of the jacket she was still wearing. Anna's jacket. It was a grounding wire. "I thought I wanted the control. I thought the data was enough, but tonight?" She looked at the woman standing in front of her, the woman who had brought coffee and warmth and chaos into her sterile aquarium. Tonight, the numbers didn't make sense. The only thing that made sense was the friction. Anna's expression softened, the guarded skepticism melting into something warmer, something that looked dangerously like hope. She tilted her head, studying Caroline with that intense, unblinking focus that had dismantled her defenses upstairs. "Friction creates heat," Anna murmured. "It burns, Caroline. It's not safe."
"I don't care about safety," Caroline said, and the truth of it was a shock to her system. "I care about the yield, and I think I think the ROI on us is infinite. The corporate metaphor hung between them, not as a shield, but as an offering, a way of translating the terrifying, unquantifiable feeling in her chest into a language she understood. Anna smiled then, a slow, unfolding expression that changed the entire atmosphere of the street. It wasn't a triumphant smile. It was a welcoming one. "Exclusive terms?" Anna asked, her voice dropping to a husky register that made Caroline's knees weak. "Non-negotiable," Caroline replied, breathless. "Full merger, no exit clauses." Anna closed the final distance. She didn't rush. She moved with the deliberate, confident grace of someone who knew exactly what the outcome would be. She reached up, her cool fingers brushing against Caroline's jaw, tracing the line of tension there until it broke. Caroline leaned into the touch, her eyes fluttering shut as the sensory input overwhelmed the logic centers of her brain. The cold air, the smell of damp concrete, the warmth of Anna's hand, it all blurred into a single point of focus. When Anna kissed her, it wasn't tentative. It was a confirmation. It was slow, deep, and exacting. A physical signature on a contract Caroline hadn't realized she was drafting until this very moment. Anna's mouth was warm, her taste dark and complex, like the coffee they'd shared, and the sensation was a data point so overwhelming that Caroline felt her entire world reorient around it. The spreadsheet in her mind, the one that tracked risk and reward, simply dissolved. There was no calculating this. There was only the feeling of Anna's body pressing against hers. The solid, undeniable reality of being held. Caroline's hands found their way to Anna's waist, pulling her closer, anchoring her. The kiss deepened, becoming less about confirmation and more about hunger, a desperate, coiled need to make up for every hour they had spent separated by a mahogany table. For a long moment, the city didn't exist. The merger didn't exist. There was only the heat between them, defying the pre-dawn chill. When they finally pulled apart, breathless and flushed, Anna rested her forehead against Caroline's. Her eyes were dark, heavy with a desire that mirrored Caroline's own. "I think," Anna whispered, her thumb brushing over Caroline's cheekbone, "that was the most productive meeting of my career." Caroline laughed, a sound that was startled and genuine, bubbling up from a place she had kept locked down for years. "I'll have to amend the minutes," she murmured. "Let's go," Anna said, taking Caroline's hand. Her grip was firm, warm, and possessive. She turned them away from the empty curb, away from the waiting ghosts of taxis and lonely apartments. "Where?" Caroline asked, though she realized with a thrill that she didn't actually care. She would follow this variable anywhere. "Breakfast," Anna decided, pulling her gently down the street. Somewhere loud, somewhere messy, somewhere with absolutely no spreadsheets. Caroline squeezed her hand, falling into step beside her. The data was gone. The silence was broken. And as they walked together into the gray morning light, Caroline realized that for the first time in her life, she wasn't just projecting a future. She was living it. The taxi driver leaned heavily on his horn, a sharp, dissonant blast that cut through the wet, heavy air between them. He rolled down the passenger window, his face a mask of late-night irritation. "Lady, are you getting in, or are we doing a dramatic pause? I've got a meter running in my head even if the flag isn't down. In or out?" Anna didn't look at him. Her hand was still resting on the door handle, the metal cold and slick under her palm. But her body had arrested its motion. She was looking at Caroline. The wind whipped a strand of dark hair across her cheek, sticking to the corner of her mouth, but she didn't move to brush it away. She stood frozen in the gray pre-dawn light, caught in the sudden, terrifying gravity of Caroline's request. "I'm not getting in," Anna said, her voice low but carrying a clarity that silenced the idling engine. She let go of the handle and slammed the door shut. The sound was a definitive, metallic punctuation mark. The driver didn't wait for an explanation. He muttered something about wasted time and peeled away from the curb, his taillights blurring into red streaks that vanished into the mist. The silence that rushed back in was deafening. They were alone on the damp concrete, framed by the stark, security-lit perimeter of the Sterling Tower. Caroline felt the cold seeping through the silk of her blouse where Anna's jacket had slipped, but the sensation registered as distant, irrelevant data. Her entire reality had narrowed down to the woman standing 3 feet away, the variable she had tried to solve for, the anomaly she had tried to mitigate, and the only person who made the silence feel like music instead of a void.
"You stayed," Caroline said, the words feeling rough and unpolished in her throat. She took a step forward, her heels clicking softly on the pavement. "You didn't take the exit." "I was waiting for a counteroffer," Anna replied, turning fully to face her. Her expression was guarded, but her eyes were dark, searching Caroline's face with an intensity that made Caroline's breath hitch. "But be careful, Caroline. You just stopped a moving vehicle. That's a significant deviation from your standard operating procedure. What exactly are we negotiating here?" Caroline closed the remaining distance, stopping just inches from where Anna stood. The scent of sandalwood and rain was overwhelming now, a sensory input that short-circuited her logic centers. "The terms of the partnership," Caroline said, her voice steadying as the truth anchored her. "I don't want a transaction. I don't want to file this night away as a quarterly win and go back to the sterile quiet of my office. I want to renegotiate the scope." Anna tilted her head, a slow, knowing smile touching the corners of her mouth. "You're talking about a merger," she murmured, her gaze dropping to Caroline's lips. "Full integration. No exit clauses, no liability caps." "Exclusive rights," Caroline whispered, reaching out to grasp the lapels of the jacket she was still wearing. Anna's jacket. It was a grounding wire, connecting them. "And I'm prepared to offer significant equity. All of it, actually." "That's high risk," Anna warned, though she stepped closer, her body heat radiating against Caroline's chilled skin. "You can't quantify this. You can't put what's happening right now into a spreadsheet." "I know," Caroline admitted, and the surrender in those 2 words felt like freedom. "I only understood data. I thought desire was just noise in the system. But the numbers are irrelevant now. The only metric that matters is that I don't want you to leave." Anna didn't speak. She simply reached out, her cool fingers tracing the line of Caroline's jaw, a deliberate, claiming touch that sent a shiver racing down Caroline's spine. The contact was electric, a current that bypassed every firewall Caroline had ever built. "Then I'm not going anywhere," Anna whispered. She closed the gap. The kiss wasn't tentative. It was a collision of intent. It was slow, deep, and devastatingly thorough, confirming every unspoken tension that had vibrated between them in the boardroom. Caroline melted into it, her hands bunching in Anna's shirt, pulling her closer until there was no air left between them. It was a chaotic, uncalculated, perfect integration. For the first time, Caroline wasn't analyzing the outcome. She was just feeling the overwhelming reality of Anna's mouth on hers, the solid weight of her presence, and the undeniable truth that some things could only be understood by touch. When they finally pulled apart, breathless and flushed under the streetlights, Anna rested her forehead against Caroline's. "Breakfast," she murmured against Caroline's skin. "Somewhere messy, somewhere without a single graph." "Lead the way," Caroline said, lacing their fingers together. They turned and walked into the city, leaving the tower and the spreadsheets far behind. The sun was just beginning to bleed gold across the skyline, turning the cold glass of the city into something warm and promising. Caroline squeezed Anna's hand, realizing the merger was a success. But the real acquisition was the heart she thought she didn't have. If you've ever found love in the last place you looked, or if a late night changed your life, subscribe to follow more of these unexpected journeys.